So I just went straight to the head of my department and I said, I'm resigning and I won't be back tomorrow. Fix it. I don't very often get that definite about what I'm going to do or not do, but it worked. The principal arranged for him to come again and have me teach the grade 12 as the head of department, and it was all fine. I guess they bent the rules a little bit, and I got my high school teaching permanent certificate, left at the spring break, never taught high school again. I still don't know what's going to happen. I love my years of high school teaching, and by the early 60s, there's no doubt, however, that my main preoccupation had become being married and the beginning of our family. On the last day of June 1960, I have to confess, I walked down the aisle in a white gown, participating in a formal Anglican marriage ceremony with one of my bridesmaids sitting right there. Once again, Carol was part of that scene. The worst part of it, I have to tell you, is that I actually agreed to obey my husband. But I did. Then we headed to the West Coast, Jim and I did, to sail for a few weeks in a very old, somewhat battered, borrowed boat. One of the happenings on that sailing trip was the backstay pulled out of the deck, we had repairs to do and all sorts of things. But it turned out to be a great introduction to both the joys and trials of married life. By the end of July, we were well embarked on living together, first on McPherson Avenue, which is not far from here, and later on at Hazelton Avenue, where we were to live for 34 years. And I wanted to interject, I didn't make much of this when I was writing the paper, but the more I thought about it this morning, and maybe a little bit last night, living on Hazelton Avenue was really key. And I'll just say that the people who lived on Hazelton Avenue happened to be Ellen Adams, who was an activist member of the NDP. Kay McPherson eventually moved down into this part of the annex, sort of north of here. There was a woman called Mrs. Fogelberg, who was an extraordinary activist. She went around pinning things on, ripping off posters that people had stuck on trees. Her big thing was save the trees. And she was something. And then Nancy Popak, who was another phenomenal peace activist, was right down the street. So I got to know some incredible people as a result of the accident of getting this people. Anyway, the big thing was in the early 60s for me was pregnancy and childbirth and trying to look after children and so on. And there's much to learn, as I certainly found out, in all respects. As in many beginning families, there were stresses. One of ours was birth control, which just was assumed to be my responsibility. We didn't have the wherewithal to really discuss it. So it was that embarrassing thing. Birth control is illegal, you get measured for a diaphragm, you sneak into the pharmacy and you measurements, he's had his diaphragm, and the pharmacist sneaks out to the back and finds a little box and hands it to you and you pay for it. It's all under the cover supposedly. And yet, thousands of women have been using birth control, hundreds of thousands of women for eons, but it was technically illegal. And then I got to England and the pill was definitely on the scene. And it was actually prescribed for me in 1963, but I was nervous about it, so I only stayed on it for a very short trial period following the birth of our second child. But the advent of the pill was food for thought. Why a pill for women? Why not a pill for men? There were little light bulbs going on. My portrait of family life would not be complete without some account of childbearing. I had a wonderful, wonderful woman obstetrician, which was just amazing, called Dr. Missio Yanayama. She was herself a mother. She delivered my first child. And both of the deliveries were at the Women's College Hospital, which was like, you couldn't be in a more perfect place. And it was mainly staffed by women at that time. But all was not perfect. I had a spinal injection for my first delivery, and that, from my experience, took away all the feeling. So I thought, I don't really need this for my second delivery. So I thought for the second birth it might be faster and easier, which it was. But Dr. Yama wasn't available for a very interesting women's reason. She was having a hysterectomy and was recovering from that, so she couldn't be present at the birth of my second child. The young male doctor who presided in her place agreed to support a natural delivery, but at some point, and without asking my permission, knocked me out, but I never found out why, because I never saw the doctor again, or the nurses. And I really felt disempowered by that experience. And I couldn't help become very, very interested in the whole natural childbirth movement and the whole issue of empowering women during their own birthing experiences, as well as the growing interest in the restoration of midwifery. 1 month after the mid-August birth of our second son, we all flew to England for my husband Jim's sabbatical year, which he spent working at the Rutherford Physics Laboratory near Oxford. And I think that I next experienced a couple of years of culture shock. It happened on several levels. I mean, even renting our Toronto house fell to me, and finding a place to live in England was also apparently my responsibility, and both were difficult. As we waited for the second son's birth, we had to, sort of make arrangements. I was still making arrangements about the housing in England. And I do remember a phone call at 4 o'clock in the morning, I think it was. I'd eaten a lot of lox and bagels the day before. And suddenly we woke up and we had to make this long distance phone call, which we did. And then I just couldn't get back to sleep. Well, 3 hours later, I was on the way to the hospital and Matthew was born. And then, within almost less than a month, we had to get on the plane and go to England, all organized with the stuff that we needed with our 2 children. I do remember Douglas never going to sleep on the entire nighttime across the channel, across the sea, across the Atlantic trip. And what happened actually was simply marvelous. He just walked up and down the aisles, and finally a very ancient Jewish rabbi just picked him up, sat him on his lap, and told him stories all the way across the Atlantic. First I was worried because Douglas had disappeared, and I found him in very good care. When I got there, I found myself living in the country in a modern house surrounded by fields of cattle, with no other building in sight. It was beside a 3-lane highway that went past the pub and a few farm cottages about a mile from our place in Alton, Oxford. We had 1 car, which of course Jim took to work. I also had 2 sets of diapers and no washing machine. Fortunately, the owners of the house were very kind. They not only wrote from their home in Wales to see how we were doing, they soon provided both a washing machine and a vacuum cleaner. Those objects arrived about 2 months after our arrival, and then at about the same time, our trunk of clothing and books that we'd shipped from Canada turned up on British rail. Delayed, we were told, by the Christmas rush. This was early November. There were other hazards to living in the country. Twice our 2-year-old escaped from the yard, once we captured 10 feet from the 3-lane highway. Second time we found that after a good hour of searching, 2 fields away, standing in the center of a circle, talking to a group of very fascinated cows. And there was a time when I and the children had bronchitis and all the cows somehow got into the yard. After a fruitless few minutes spent hurling the children's toys at them, I thought, I'm so incompetent, I can't get these cows out of the yard, what am I going to do? Talk about loss of confidence. I finally called the farmer. When 4 men with cattle prods arrived to deal with the problem, I felt better. Maybe I wasn't totally incompetent. I was greatly comforted that year by 2 things. One was a book on living in England by an American woman, which she called "These Ruins Are Inhabited." Mind you, I was in the country. There's a lot more wonderful stuff that went on in England. But in my experience, I didn't even know where to buy apple juice. I mean, it was quite, and I had no car. The other thing was the insistence of a visiting school teaching friend, an English woman who I taught in Toronto and then was back in England, came to visit me, and she said, "What are you doing here? Isolated, nothing to do. I'm getting you a TV." And she marched us into Oxford and rented a TV, so we got fabulous British TV all year, which was wonderful. And in the end, we just had a wonderful time living in England. In our quiet country, life was really quite blissful by the time we got used to it. Despite the TV, we were mainly in touch with the outside world during that year through the newspapers. The columns of Catherine Whitehorn in the Weekly Observer especially fascinated me because they were funny and they raised family issues. What I would have thought of at that time, were family issues. One was about the ridiculous sticky fingers of childhood, which I was very much experiencing. Sticky fingers everywhere, the children touched. And the other explored the farming out of difficult teenagers to other families, usually relatives, which she claimed was an ancient practice that she herself had experienced as a teenager. She went out to stay with Scottish relatives or something like that and thought it was a very, very good idea. But the most dramatic news came to us through the Observer, arrived when we opened the paper one Saturday in November. Mind you, we weren't turning on the TV, so we weren't getting all the news immediately as it happened. It arrived when we opened the paper and found to our horror that American President John Kennedy had been assassinated. It seemed a huge turning point in our lives, and I just remember how shocked we were. The children were 1 and 3 by the time we returned from the sabbatical in England in the fall of '64.